Hello and greetings to all our learners. Welcome to the lecture on Understanding Human Rights. I am Dr. Amna. I teach political science at Shyama Prasad Mukherjee College for Women, University of Delhi. As we take our learnings and discussions forward, the lecture today, Understanding Human Rights, will try to explain the concept and issues associated with human rights. The lecture will also discuss various aspects involved in the implementation and observation of human rights. So now let's take the discussions forward. We all know that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it was a milestone document in the history of human rights. The Declaration was proclaimed by United Nations General Assembly in Paris on 10 December 1948. The General Assembly Resolution 217A, it sets the common standards of achievement for all peoples and all nations, and this was also translated into 500 languages. Now, when we see that, when we talk about human rights, in the past also, before UNHDR, there were attempts to establish rights which guarantee dignity and respect for the individual. The precursor to today's human rights documents, some of it we name, the Magna Carta 1215, the English Bills of Rights 1689, French Declaration on the Rights of Man and Citizen 1789, the US Constitution and Bills of Rights 1791. Now, we all know that when the world witnessed the First World War, once it comes to an end, there was an attempt to save the world from another war. And therein we see that in the year 1919, the International Labour Organization was established. This was to ensure protecting the workers with respect to their rights, including their health and safety. Then also, we also had the League of Nations, which was established after the end of the First World War. Now, this tells us that even in the past, before United Nations Human Rights Declaration came, there were attempts to safeguard rights of human beings. Now, after the Second World War, the world witnesses the establishment of the United Nations in a way, and it's an attempt to bolster international peace and prevent conflict. President Franklin Roosevelt in 1941 State of the Union address, when he spoke of the world founded on four essential freedoms, and we named them freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom from want and freedom from fear. So the preamble of the United Nations Human Declaration's Right tries to reflect on these values only, that is, inherent dignity, faith in fundamental human rights, dignity and worth of human person, common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations, to the end that every individual and every organ of society keeping this declaration constantly in mind. Now, once again, we read out from the preamble of UNHDR, that is, every organ of society keeping this declaration constantly in mind shall strive by teaching and education to promote respect for these rights and freedoms, and by progressive measures, national and international, to secure their universal and effective recognition and observance both amongst the people of member states themselves and amongst the people of territories under their jurisdiction. We now take the articles of United Nations Human Rights Declaration one by one as a comprehensive analysis to make us understand what human rights actually signify. Once again, we are taking the reference from the article that we have picked up from UNHDR. Article 1 says all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Article 2 saying everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth or other status. Furthermore, the article also says that no distinction shall be made on the basis of the political, jurisdictional or international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing or under any other limitation of sovereignty. The Article 3 makes a very important declaration, that is, everyone has the right to life, liberty and security of person. Article 4 again elaborating on the vivid dimensions of human rights, saying that no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. Article 5 again bringing forward more egalitarian concerns, that is, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. Article 6, everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. Article 7, all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. So therefore, what we are seeing, as we are reading from the preamble and the various articles of UNHDR, the broad idea of human rights comes forward, that is, rights inherent to all human beings regardless of race, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion or any other status. Then again, once again reading from the official sources of UN.org, the human rights includes the right to life and liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, freedom of opinion and expression, right to work and education, and many more. And more important, it makes a very important assertion that everyone is entitled to these rights without discrimination. Then there is a principle of universality that emphasizes in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights in 1948 the duty of the states to protect and promote all human rights. Therefore, human rights are seen as inalienable, interdependent and indivisible. So all these are important features of human rights, that is, they are inalienable, they are interdependent and they are indivisible. Now, when we look at the idea of non-discrimination, this applies to everyone in relation to all human rights and freedom, and it also prohibits discrimination entailing both rights as well as duties. So therefore, the framework of rights has to be seen with reference to the framework of duties. That is, we are entitled towards our human rights, but we should also respect the human rights of others. So therefore, rights and duties have to be seen in a complementary framework. Then let's have a look at certain important human rights treaties, and these treaties, by their very definition or by their very names and connotation, tell us the significant purpose they serve. We have ICCPR, that is International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. That is, then we have International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Then International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. So, international human rights law therefore lays down obligations which states are bound to respect. By becoming parties to international treaties, states assume obligations and duties under international law to respect, to protect and to fulfill human rights. Then when we look at international human rights law further, we see that it lays down the obligations of governance to act in certain ways or to refrain from certain acts in order to promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms of individuals or groups. The United Nations has defined a broad range of internationally accepted rights, as we are seeing that there are civil, cultural, economic, political and social rights, and then there are mechanisms to protect and promote these rights. So now let's take them one by one when we talk about economic, social, cultural rights. That is, right to work in just and favorable conditions. Example, right to social protection or to an adequate standard of living, the highest attainable standards of physical and mental well-being, rights of education and employment of benefits of cultural benefits and scientific progress. Then there are civil and political rights also. Let's take some examples here, or rights that can be put under the category of civil and political rights: freedom of movements, equality before the law, the rights for fair trial and presumption of innocence, freedom of thought, conscience and religion, freedom of opinion and expression, peaceful assembly, freedom of association, participation in public affairs and elections, protection of minority rights. Then Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Crimes of Genocide, that was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1948. Participating countries were advised to prevent and punish actions of genocide in war and peacetime. So all of it tells us about the various attempts made through the agency of United Nations to strengthen and safeguard the dignity and respect of the human beings. Then International Convention on Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. This was a United Nations convention. It was third generation human rights instrument. Convention commits its members to the elimination of racial discrimination and promotion of understanding amongst all races. Then another convention on rights of persons with disabilities. This was an international human rights treaty of United Nations to protect rights and dignity of people with disability. This convention was the first human rights treaty of the 21st century, which was adopted by United Nations General Assembly in 2006 and opened for signature in 2007. Then when we are trying to look at human rights, very important to understand the work of United Nations Human Rights Council. Now this is United Nations body whose main mission is to promote and protect human rights around the world. Now when we look at the United Nations Human Rights Council in a deep manner, we find that it is an intergovernmental body within the United Nations system responsible for strengthening the promotion and protection of human rights. Its headquarters are in Geneva and it was founded in 2006. So Office of the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner for Human Rights, which is commonly known as Office of Commissioner for Human Rights, again as a principal United Nations office, it is there to protect and promote human rights for all. It leads global human rights efforts, speaks out objectively in the face of human rights violations worldwide. Then it is again taking in from the sources of UNHCR that it is a forum for identifying, highlighting and developing responses to today's human rights challenges, human rights research, education, public information and advocacy activities in the United Nations system. Once again, as you can see that we are taking this from the official web resources of United Nations Office of Human Rights Commissioner. Then when we look at peace, security, development and human rights. We find that all three are essential pillars of United Nations system. Peace, security, development and human rights are interlinked and therefore are mutually reinforcing. And then it also attempts, when we try to put these three pillars together, this also mainstreams the human rights into the United Nations system, also looking at the significance of human rights for not only for peace, security, human well-being, but also for the larger goal of development and welfare. Then when we have a look at how the United Nations, through the Office of Human Rights Commissioner and its various other agencies, tries to work with governments, civil society, the respective national human rights institutions and other United Nations entities and international organizations such as International Labour Organization, in their efforts to promote and protect human rights. Then let's have a look at a national domestic framework, wherein we'll have a look at the National Human Rights Commission. Now, in conformity with the Paris principles adopted at the first International Workshop on National Institutions for Promotion and Protection of Human Rights, held in Paris in 1991 and endorsed by the General Assembly of United Nations by its regulation 48/134 in 1993. So what we see, again taking from the official website of National Human Rights Commission, this is an embodiment of India's concern for promotion and protection of human rights. One must learn more about NHRC, that is nhrc.nic.in, to look at the various dimensions of realms of work wherein wherein the National Human Rights Commission NHRC is working. Then an important quote to highlight the significance of human rights, that is Kofi Annan, former Secretary General, United Nations. And a very important point that Kofi Annan puts forward, that we all know what the problems are and we all know what we have promised to achieve. What is needed now is not more declarations or promises, but actions to fulfill the promises already made. Now, this tells us about an important issue that is concerning human rights, that is about implementation. The world has ample amount of treaties and conventions. There are several issues of human rights violations that are being reported in several countries across. So therefore, the need of the hour is to strengthen the already existing apparatus, consolidate the gains and pledge that in theory as well as in practice and action, the promises towards and the pledges towards human rights will be duly respected. Then today, when we are looking at the fact that today at the global realm, there are huge amount of challenges for human rights, poverty and global inequalities. When the world is divided into rich versus poor, north versus south, developing versus developed, the issues of human rights take a back seat when majority of the world still suffers from poverty and global inequalities. Discrimination of race, color, nationality is one factor which definitely has an impact on human dignity and self-respect. Armed conflict and violence lead to huge amount of loss of not only property but also liberty for many people around the globe. Impunity, democratic deficits, weak institutions, challenges of implementation, knowledge gap, capacity gap, commitment gap, security gap, all of it are challenges that are there for human rights, and human rights is one agenda wherein nations and the states therein have to always engage in To look and to have a deeper understanding on the challenges to human rights, one must refer to humanrights.com, a very important web resource that presents to us the challenges that are there for various dimensions of human rights. Then an important aspect that comes forward, that is the Asian value perspective. See, we all know the trajectory of the history in international relations and global politics, that in 1990s there was collapse of the Soviet Union. During the Cold War, in its last phase, one finds that there is disintegration of USSR. Now at this point, and in times of future and in present times also, there is an issue of cultural relativism of human rights against the very notion of universalism of human rights. That is, values are distinct of the Asian milieu from the European discourse, the communication outlook, and the significance of economic, social, cultural influence on human dignity. Then at the same time, the Asian value perspective puts forward the need to correlate rights with duties. An individual must have access to rights, but at the same time, individuals must be educated and sensitized to blend the right balance between rights and their framework of duties. So therefore, it's very essential to understand the Asian value perspective while we are trying to understand human rights. So dear learners, as we are taking our learning on human rights, we find out that human rights are essential for human beings, human rights are integral to human beings, and most important, human rights are a safeguard, safety valve for the dignity of the individual. Over the time, the various dimensions of human rights have evolved from civil and political rights. One is also witnessing the emergence of rights of society, culture, economy, or to the larger debate on the third generation right. Today, there are several challenges to human rights that are coming from various forces, and these challenges to human rights put forward the need for a holistic perspective on security. When we look at poverty, the need of the hour is to redefine security not only from the traditional military aspect of control, domination and care, but in the sense of freedom from want, freedom from vagaries and instability of financial markets. When we talk about democratic deficits and weak institutions, there is a need for a political security in order to give a much more better meaning to human rights. When we look at loss of life and liberty because of armed conflict and violence, there is a need to factor in community security. So therefore, human security as a concept has to be given utmost significance in its 7 areas, from environmental to food to health to community, in order to work out challenges of implementation, knowledge, capacity, commitment and security which are there in the overall ambit of human rights domain. So therefore, once again, as we are concluding our learning, we all once again refer to what Kofi Annan, former General Secretary, United Nations, says, that we all know what the problems are and we all know what we have promoted to achieve, but what is needed now is not more deliberations or promises or declarations, but action to fulfill the promises already made. The United Nations Human Rights Declaration was a milestone document that pledges respect for human dignity and well-being. Reading out from its preamble to the elaborate articles that it has from talking about equality, liberty, freedom from violence, dignity, this puts forward the need for a very holistic understanding, that is, human rights are indivisible, they are interdependent. And most important, as we are trying to understand human rights, one must also understand that it cannot be seen on a universal paradigm without understanding the Asian value perspective, that is, the need to factor in the inputs, the influences that is coming forward, wherein rights and duties are duly blended. Now, as we are taking our learning on human rights, so dear learners, do read the official document of United Nations Human Rights Declaration. Do go to the official website sources of the Office of United Nations Human Rights Commissioner in order to have a first-hand primary reading of the understanding of the dimensions of human rights, the dynamics that are involved in implementation of human rights, and looking at challenges to human rights from various events, from various policies, and how does one contain the deficits in terms of due implementation of human rights. So we hope you all enjoyed the lecture today, Understanding Human Rights. Thank you.